Hello, I'm Michael Denon, Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning and Dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education here at UC Irvine. And this is Conversations with the Vice Provost, where I bring in colleagues, other members of the university community and the community at large, and we discuss topics that are really of interest to our students, the whole UCI community. I like to say Orange County, the state, and even the entire world. So that's where we go. It's exciting to have with me Patty Morales, our Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management. Patty, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. And I just have to say it again. I said on the last Zoom one, this is always weird because like I'll look at you, but then I have no idea where I'm looking in like Zoom space. So
Right.
I look like I'm going all over the place, but that's okay. The first question we obviously have to answer, which is actually the first question I had to answer as a vice provost when I started these podcasts. Everybody was like, well, what's a vice provost and what's a dean? So what's enrollment management?
Well, enrollment management, simply put, is bringing into alignment strategic enrollment planning with the goals and mission of the university.
And
So that's the quick.
right. So if we unpack that a little bit,
Mhm.
at UCI, I think one of the things we're most proud of is overall how well our students do. Right, students graduate at UCI from a very high rate, but also that we're half first gen, we're a large percentage low income, we're Hispanic serving, we're ANA-PZ. When you think of top 10 research universities, top 10 public research universities even, our chancellor regularly points out, I think, something true. It's hard to find places with the same level of sort of diversity and student success at the same time.
Right.
Maybe some of the other UCs, things like that, but it's not a large set of universities. And you and your office clearly play a large role in that. Can you maybe make some comments at how that all starts and where that comes from?
Yeah,
From your
absolutely.
side?
Actually, yes, you're getting to the heart of it. So I just gave the very high level definition of enrollment management, but really what we're talking about when we refer to enrollment management is a series of strategies that really leverage our collaboration with our campus partners to achieve those institutional goals. I mean, when you think about it, enrollment really touches on nearly every facet of the university. Uh, Enrollment is impacted and impacts all of these offices. So it is the job of enrollment management to anticipate what those impacts might be so that our colleagues can adapt and best prepare to ensure that the students are have the resources that they need. For example, working with your office, you and I work together quite a bit because what I'm able to do is tell you a bit about who our students are, because that changes. It changes very frequently. The demographics are changing, what students are looking for from their education changes, so that your office and others are prepared to serve those students so that they can graduate and be successful, and on it goes. So enrollment management is about a life cycle, and it's also about coordination and strategy.
Something you said, Patty, and this is probably going to take us in a slightly different direction than I expected, because you just inspired something in me that I hadn't realized. You just said something that I've been saying regularly to faculty in the last year, which is the life experiences our students have changed, right?
Yep.
And you'll appreciate this. I regularly point out to our colleagues, look, we are admitting the best students. That's like not even a question. That's what Patty's office does. Now, those best students may not be people who look like you did,
That's right.
right? That's
Right.
the challenge, I think, for faculty, is really understanding that our students aren't us,
Mhm.
yet they represent the best of the next generation. And that partnership, that's something I just realized is very exciting. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on how you could envision, because I think that's a new way forward for UCI, sort of part of what it means for your office, not just to be the place that admits students, but the place
Right.
that can articulate who they are, what their strengths are, what their passions are. maybe a little more in that space would be useful, I think.
Of course, and it's a bit spoilery because it's going into a topic that I know we'll address in a bit, which is about the admissions process. And the reason I'm going there is because our holistic, comprehensive review approach to admissions is precisely about what you're describing, recognizing and valuing the array of strengths that students bring and contribute to the institution. Their life experiences beyond what they're doing in the classroom. Of course, that's important, but everything that they're bringing with them, we need to thrive as an institution, and students need to draw on from one another to be 21st century global citizens. If we weren't interested in the value of that range of experience, well, we would do this in a very different way, and we would be a very different place. Enrollment management is about ensuring that the mission that we all put so much effort into realizing can be reflected by those students. And where is that found? That's found in their life experiences and the variety of them. Our students are not only geographically from everywhere, their backgrounds are so varied,
Yeah.
and we have something to benefit from all of that.
No, that's exciting. I really see that as the future, not just of UCI, but of higher ed in general. And UCI is definitely a place I think that can lead in that area. When we think about enrollment management, I do want to ask you more of a nuts and bolts kind of question, because you've been in this business for a while.
A while.
At very different institutions in some ways.
That's right.
When I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the whole comprehensive review and that piece, but from the broader set of all the stuff that goes into enrollment management, both the recruitment, dealing with them when they're here and everything, what are some of the maybe unique challenges or exciting features of being at a place like a public research university that is very large versus maybe, you know, a smaller liberal arts college or a different entity? It's kind of a vague question, so you can go wherever you want with that, Patty.
No, I think I know what sort of catalyzed it and what you're thinking of. And I'm glad you asked it, because as you alluded to, I've been in this business for higher ed for 20 years, admissions and enrollment in particular, about 15. And until I came to UCI, most of my experience was with private liberal arts, smaller institutions. I did my doctoral work as a UC student, but that's very different than being an administrator in it. And why I've loved this place and what is different about being in a large public is that we really are accountable to and in conversation with the citizens of California and the world, of course, but we are part of the fabric of the state. And it's important that that remains part of our identity. I know that when people think about large research universities, it can be very abstracted, but when you're in a public institution, you're reminded of where you're at. And yes, it's more and more selective, but we are in conversation with the folks in our state to really engage with that and think carefully about where we sit, not only as a global research institution, but as one that is publicly about what we're doing in California for its citizens.
Yeah, so that kind of leads us to our middle question, which is the one probably is on everybody's mind and ironically least relevant to us, but we should address it. As California makes statements about standardized tests, as the pandemic causes issues around standardized tests, they're getting, I guess, a scrutiny or visibility that they probably haven't had for a while. I mean, people have been talking about it on and off forever. And I know in your role in admissions, you've been in those conversations. But kind of, where do you see that conversation going? I guess is the way to think about it.
Sure. So the debate over standardized tests has been really around for at least the last several years, 5, 10 years even. And what that's about is its function the function of a standardized test in an application review and selection process. And as you're alluding to, the regents did approve back at the beginning of summer a policy where we will no longer require the submission of standardized test scores for admission to the university. So we're no longer required to consider that within the broader framework of everything we look at in an application. At UCI, we also, our academic senate voted to not use standardized tests for any part of the admission selection process. So the opportunity, though, that provides us is that it reminds everybody that over essentializing or over relying on just one data point was never what this was about.
Right.
You know, and we have at UCI comprehensive review. And what that means is we're looking at 14 different factors in considering a student's application. So now it's 13. Well,
Right.
13 is still, it's still a lot
It's still
of information.
Unfortunately, Patty, it's an unlucky number, but I won't mention that.
Right.
We should still call it 14 and just not count the number
Okay,
13.
right. Well, we'll
Sort
split
of
one of them into two.
apartments do, right? There's no floor 13.
No, floor 13. Well, we could bifurcate one of the questions.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the elements, but it matters because it's reminding everybody. You take away that one, and
Right.
and you remind folks that maybe we were, maybe families were looking and students too much at that one piece, when we as professionals, we're always looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But I hope that it helps families feel more reassured that all of those other elements were always just as important.
No, and I think that's kind of the exciting thing, and it's really the next topic we wanted to go to, is this idea of people always looking for that magic bullet to get in.
Mm-hmm.
They think it's really interesting, as I learned more about the admissions process from working closely with you, from just being at the university, how misunderstood it was.
Yeah.
In the world. I'll just share one anecdote. Like for myself, I am an alumni from Princeton, and when I first came out here and had time and energy, I would do alumni interviews, which interestingly enough at Princeton are not required for admissions, but you can always do. And it fascinated me, the cycles of what kids clearly thought would get them into a college. Because if the high school counselor said you need to be well-rounded, every answer every student gave me to almost any question tried to prove to me that they were well-rounded. In the years that the goal was to be an expert in one thing, every answer to every question I asked, no matter what the question was their attempt to prove me they were an expert. And it was really fascinating to watch how they had been coached around a theme that, from my side, the admissions office at Princeton would have, always gave me advice and things to do, never correlated with anything the admissions office was actually saying or looking for.
Right.
And so I think the first narrow part is you must get outreach. Maybe now you're far enough up the food chain, you don't get the direct emails as much, but throughout your career, you must commonly get this question, right? How do I get my kid into school? And have you seen the views of that change in interesting ways and evolve, or is it a little amusing what they think the magic bullet is compared to what's under the hood on your process?
Yeah, I think it hasn't changed very much. That's what's so interesting. And incidentally, when I travel, not that we've traveled in a long time, I almost never tell people what I actually do because that's exactly the question that will that will arise. And the reason I struggle to answer is because I think families don't believe me when I tell them there isn't that magic formula, but I'm going to explain why that is. I mean, the thinking that there is this magic bullet, magic formula, when you consider that, that's predicated on an assumption that there's some objective criteria that's replicable every year.
Right.
And that's not at all the case. Our enrollment goals vary year to year. And what I mean by that is the size. There's always only so much space that we have, right? But on any given year, that might be a little more, a little less, depending on a number of factors. So that's one example of a factor that can shift year to year. Another might be the creation of a new program that creates other opportunities that might not, so there are variations in what we need in terms of enrollment year to year. But again, more to the point, if you're just thinking of a set of objective, and I'm saying objective meaning sort of numerical inputs, that when you put them through the hopper is always going to get you the same output, it just can't happen. And in our case, for example, we had just about 98,000 applications for freshmen last year. 123 if we add the transfers in there, but 98,000 freshman applicants. We admitted just under a third, around 29%. So 30,000, yeah, I mean, 30 something, 30, it was like 30,000 students. There is no way that we were ranking 30,000. I mean, you consider that, but I mean, that sounds really, large for us and extreme, but even for an institution that is only receiving, 10,000 applications and admitting 5,000 of them, you're still not going to rank 5,000 students and make some arbitrary cut. I don't think any of us would actually want that.
Yeah.
And an over emphasis on data elements that can be, input numerically and indicated in a finite way, it sort of collapses this idea of not just merit, but that experience we were talking about earlier that students can bring to the institution, and the value of it and why it matters. That's okay. That's difficult to, put into a single numeric indicator, but it should be. And admissions is subjective because we're looking at human experiences, and we're trying to balance out some of those objective, GPA, etc., inputs with this other human attribute. And I personally think that that's what's most meaningful and most powerful about what we're able to do here, is allow students to shine in various ways.
Patty, when you said that, I realized I hadn't thought of it too much exactly like this, but the small scale version of that from my life is youth sports. And when I was a commissioner for the extra program in AYSO, where we actually had to select teams based on tryouts, right? Parents came in with an idea that kids are cleanly ranked in ability and the top 15 make the team. When you realize even at the small number of, 40 kids trying out for a soccer team, okay, maybe 5 of them are obviously going to be on the team. But the rest of it, it's amazing. It comes down to a little bit what you said. It's the mission and goals and strategy of that team. What balance do they need to create, right? If they take, 8 more players that are all forwards and end up with no defense, that's not really a very well balanced team. And coaches each come with their own view of the type of team they want to coach and the strategy they have and their expressions and their goals. And so it's an objective subjectivity, I feel like, right? We know what our strategic plan is. We know the type of student body we want to have. It's not a numerical objectivity, but there's a real clear goal there. Does that resonate, I think?
Oh, I actually wish I had thought of saying it that way. I think that's perfect. Yes, it's not that we have no criteria at all. We do, and that's informed by our mission. It's informed by our identity. And when we're looking at applicants, of course, that's all part of it, is thinking about who we are and that fit. And I'm going to segue a bit into that theme. I think when we're thinking about rankings, for example, families often look at those rankings and sort of get really caught up in what that means to get into an institution that's ranked X or Y. But really, it's about what is going to best serve what you want as a student out of your college experience. There are vast differences from institution to institution. We work really hard to communicate what those are. I mean, think about it. When different institutions are providing their materials and they're giving presentations about who they are, they're trying to distinguish themselves
Right.
because they want students to understand what they have to offer. And that's about communicating to the student, this is what we are, this is what we're about. Think about what you're looking for and if those align.
Yeah.
And if it didn't matter, then we wouldn't have to spend all of this, energy to be really, really smart and purposeful about that, because it means so much that a student understands what we're about, what our mission is about, and consider if that's what they're looking for from their experience.
No, I love that. And I can't remember if I've mentioned this in past podcasts. I have 3 daughters. One's already been through college, one's in college, and one is applying now.
Yeah.
And one thing I'm most proud of is they've had some of the most stress-free college applications, because I know what I know from being inside the academic world.
Hmm.
I can really focus them on, what do you want out of college, and ask very specific questions, even ones that seem silly sometimes, like, do you want to be in a city or not? Do you, if you
Oh,
really
yeah.
want
Mhm.
that city experience, I don't recommend applying to UCI.
Right, right.
Just saying,
Yeah,
we are not
yeah,
New York or San Francisco.
yeah. That conversation, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great way to help a student figure out what it is they want. Because if
Yeah,
you put anybody on the spot and say, what are you looking for from whatever experience, it can
yeah,
be, oh man, what do I want? But if you're having a conversation, and ideally it's more than one,
yeah,
and trying to take a note or recording it on your phone, it helps the student to sort of draw out what gets them happy and
yeah,
excited, or what they're interested in. And I also think, incidentally, if we go to the application part for a second,
yeah,
here's a little tip. So no magic bullet, but a little tip where I was saying all of those non-objective criteria are so important, and why that is because we're trying to learn who you are. The volume being what it is, we're still, every application is a person.
right,
And in order to learn who you are, those open-ended questions are really that opportunity to say that. And it can be difficult to answer those just cold, right?
right,
It's ideal if you can have some conversations. This is the tip part. Conversations with a dear friend, a parent, a coach, a mentor, ideally more than one conversation, and to take the notes, to record it, because that's where you're your truest self, and where you're going to be able to articulate what means the most to you. And when
yeah,
you're an application reader, that comes through. So both in thinking about where you would like to apply, and then within the process itself, I think having conversations is the best way to prepare for that.
oh,
Having conversations with people you trust.
yeah, that's a great tip, Patty. And it really goes with the idea of, that also can help you figure out where you want to apply, and how
Absolutely.
you're going to mesh with that. And you said something that's absolutely critical. You want to be happy. And I point this out to
Mm.
students all the time, both when they get here to UCI, but also, as they're, when we talk to high school counselors or visiting students or people on tours, it's like, if you're happy, you're way more likely to be successful. And that's the other reason we want
Hmm.
to find fit. As you said, one of our strategic missions and goals is for our students to be successful. Well, if they're not going to fit in with UCI, doesn't mean they're not meant for college or the university. It just
Right.
means they should probably fit somewhere else, because
Mhm.
again, being happy helps make you successful.
Absolutely. And you'll be able to draw more readily. You'll feel more encouraged to draw on all of the resources that are available at an institution. And to sort of loop this back to enrollment management, what we're able to do in enrollment management is help signal to all of our partners, deans and administrative partners, what they need to do to make sure that the students know what those resources are, and make them available. But if a student is feeling, not so great, it can be hard sometimes to reach out to them.
Yeah.
So we're trying to ensure that the students kind of know enough about us from the outset that they would feel, once they're here, an assurance that we have what they'll need to be successful should they struggle. But the happiness part is really what can bring you out to help,
Yeah.
make sure that you're reaching for those resources.
No, that's awesome, Patty. That is, I think, a great thought to end on. There is so much awesome advice in this podcast. Every parent who has a kid going to college needs to listen to this. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you everyone for listening, and hope you come back for more.
Thank you for having me.